really excited to have this youth-centered discussion on climate and Maine's environment with the youth representatives of Maine Climate Council. My name is Abigail Hayne. For those I haven't met, I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Youth Climate Engagement Coordinator with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. And in this role, I support youth engagement in Maine's climate action plan and policies, and it is my absolute honor to be facilitating this conversation with the youth reps of the Maine Climate Council. I'm just going to go over some ground rules for the call before handing the mic over to the youth reps to lead the conversation. Just please make sure if you're muted before you speak, or just be sure you're muted if you're not speaking, and feel free to leave your camera on or off for the call. This meeting is being recorded and it'll be available to watch on the Maine Climate Council YouTube channel. And I want to remind folks this is a youth-centered space. We absolutely welcome all people of all ages to join and listen in. But if you could just please hold the discussion time at the end for young folks and students to ask questions and provide feedback and perspectives, as they just don't always have the designated space to do so. And just as the next hour, how that's going to go, we'll do a quick round of introductions from the youth representatives. They're going to discuss their roles, what they do with the Climate Council, and then that'll set the stage and provide us as a sort of launch point for the discussion, which will be about the last 45 minutes of the call. Please hold on to your questions until then. But when the time comes, young folks on the call are highly encouraged to speak up, ask questions, share a story, share something you'd like us to bring back to the Climate Council. It's really an open floor, so please use it as you see fit. We would love to hear from you. So that is that designated discussion time. And before we get started, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about who's calling in today. So if you feel comfortable, please share in the chat your name, your age, where you're calling in from, and one way you take climate action in your own life. I'll just drop that prompt into the chat now, just so I can kind of get to know everyone here, and so youth reps can also see where folks are calling in from and what their interests may be. So now I'm going to pass it on to the youth reps to introduce themselves. Wilson, you can go ahead and click to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name's Alyssa Susi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the youth rep for the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, and I currently am a fellow at the Northeast Climate Hub. And you can go to the next one.
Hey everyone, I'm Mo Drame. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a youth representative for the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, and I'm also a student at UMaine Orno. And you can go to the next slide.
Hi guys, I'm Kate Rice. I use she, her pronouns. I'm on the Natural and Working Lands Working Group with Bethany, and I'm a student at Waterville Senior High School, member of Maine Youth for Climate Justice. I lead the high school cohort, and I also volunteer with Maine Youth Power and Defend Our Health.
Hi everyone, I'm Bethany. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also on the Natural and Working Lands Working Group, and I currently work for the Climate Initiative.
Hi, I'm Edge Venuti. I'm on the Coastal Marine Working Group. I'm a freshman at the University of Maine and Orono, and I also am a core member of Maine Youth for Climate Justice.
So we're just going to start with some background on the Maine Climate Council and why we're all here today. So the Maine Climate Council is a group of scientists, industry leaders, bipartisan officials, engaged citizens, all who helped create the Maine's first climate action plan. And so the Climate Council has 2 subcommittees and 6 working groups, which totals about 300 people. And these members of these groups are experts in their field, both in knowledge and lived experience. And as you're well aware, because you're here, there are youth reps on the Climate Council and working groups and subcommittees. As youth reps, we bring our own unique lived experiences and perspectives to the discussion to ensure that youth voices are heard and represented in climate planning. And so the Climate Council has a few primary goals. The first is that we have a Maine climate action plan and that it's updated every 4 years. And the second is that Maine must be carbon neutral by 2045. And those are both actually state laws. And finally, the Climate Council works to ensure that Maine's people are resilient to climate change. And the Climate Council and its working groups and subcommittees all meet on a regular basis to track how Maine is doing to meet its goals. And the next slide. So Maine's Climate Action Plan, Maine Won't Wait, was delivered in 2020. It's a 4-year plan to address the impacts of climate change in Maine, build community resilience to climate effects, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But the plan is also currently being implemented, and we're due for an update by the end of 2024. And that's why we have you all on the call today to really discuss the current work that we're doing to update the plan and how you all can get involved. And so the next slide. And so really Maine has 8 primary climate action strategies, which you can see here. For the purpose of today's discussion, we're going to focus mostly on that one in the bottom left corner, which is to protect Maine's environment and working lands and waters. And you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, to start getting into the subcommittees, let's start with the STS, or Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, of the Maine Climate Council. We collect and monitor the information that really lays the foundation for the council and working groups, especially as they draft recommendations for the updated climate action plan. Our work provided the scientific basis for Maine Won't Wait. In 2020, we released a 370-page report on the impacts of climate change in Maine, and we're gearing up to release an updated assessment this year. In addition to these reports, we track sea level rise projections for the state, create maps to find which areas will deal with the most flooding, research how Maine's organisms will respond to climate change, and we also work very closely with the working groups and to support them as they develop those recommendations for climate action. The subcommittee is actually presenting the findings of their most recent studies at tomorrow's Maine Climate Council meeting. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely try to tune in to hear more. And you can go to the next slide.
Hey, Ed, you good to talk about Coastal and Marine Working Group?
So yeah, the Coastal Marine Working Group kind of provides the Climate Council with recommendations on how to strengthen Maine's coastal waters in like this changing climate. And it's kind of known that the Gulf of Maine is one of the fastest warming bodies of water on the planet. So we have to make sure that we're constantly staying on top of implementing strategies that protect our oceans and the communities of people that live there. And that kind of means just rolling with all the changes because everything's happening so fast. And what does this look like? The Coastal Marine Working Group meets regularly, particularly in the spring, because the climate action plan needs to be updated by the end of the year. And there's a lot of work to be done, I believe, specifically in this kind of area. And right now there's different subgroups to dive into particular topics, like the coastal fishery communities, and blue carbon is a subgroup. And different strategies that are being discussed are managing our local fisheries and aquaculture to help build resilience against climate change, investing more money into marine economies and the infrastructure, exploring blue carbon, which is carbon sequestered by our oceans, marshes, and seagrasses, and then figuring out what kind of data needs to be collected on marine organisms, their environments, and figure out the best ways to protect them.
Yeah, so the Natural and Working Lands group has a couple different objectives, but overall it's tracking how the strategies in the climate action plan related to environmental and natural resources are going. So right now we're drafting recommendations to increase farmland conservation, to build funding capacity and staffing for land conservation efforts, both state and private, and also talking about what types of lands to prioritize in those conservation goals. So one of the big topics of conversation in this group is that Maine is one of the most forested states in the country. And so a lot of the conversation has been around how we rely on abundant forests and natural resources for climate resiliency. So one of the big targets in Maine Won't Wait is conserving 30% of Maine lands by 2030. But a lot of what the group has been doing is talking about the strategies needed to achieve that, but also how to integrate equitable access and equitable usage of that land into it. So not just the conservation, but what comes after that.
Yeah, so right now we've been split into 3 subgroups to tackle like different areas of this larger issue. So one group is working on land conservation, another is working on increasing the food produced and eaten in the state to 30% by 2030. And this is like eating local food versus like importing food, I guess. Yeah, and decreasing the carbon emitted through shipping. We also have a subgroup working on carbon-friendly forest practices, which is cool.
Great. Thank you all so much for those introductions. So with all that being said, now is the space for our question and answer and our discussion. As a reminder, this is a youth-centered conversation, so please, if you have anything you would like to ask or something you'd like to share, you can use the chat function, or you can use the hand raise function in Zoom, and I can invite you to speak and point to one of the youth reps to answer your questions. And yeah, please feel free to share anything if you're curious about a specific climate policy or action, how the Climate Council functions, what the working groups, how they function as well. Or if you just want to provide a comment about something you'd like the youth reps and Climate Council to consider as they work on updating the climate action plan, any and all of that goes. So with that said, please feel free to start sharing questions, comments, etc. Yeah, Martin, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for the natural and working lands group. It sounds like in your conversations, you're talking about land conservation, but also simultaneously talking about food production. In my mind, I kind of think of food production as like clearing out land, forested land, and planting crops. Is that consistent in your conversations? Are they opposing ideas, or is there kind of a combination of those two ideas?
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, Bethany or Kate, you want to go ahead?
I can take that question. I think especially like in the conversation of conservation, a big emphasis has been on conserving land for agriculture, as well as like when we typically think of conservation, it's as like keeping a forest untouched or that kind of thing. And but with the increasing the food eaten and produced in Maine, keeping that in Maine, we're talking a lot about also conserving farmland for farming and farming that land in a sustainable way, and also increasing the infrastructure that Maine has to be able to produce food, which we currently lack. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
would add to like Martin, actually, like we had a meeting in the group that I'm a part of for a subgroup where someone asked the same question today. They were like, so if you incentivize like more farmland, are people going to start like clearing forested land to create farms? And one of the people on the call was talking about how basically like a lot of forest land that is held in conservation may have very specific terms on like how it's managed and how it's held. And also a lot of so that's one reason that could prevent that. And then another thing that they were talking about was how, I lost my train of thought. So they were also talking about how what the group is doing is really trying to establish funding and processes for the state and private people to keep farmland that is farmland now from being sold into development and turned into other things like housing. So I think a lot of what we've been talking about is how like Maine lags behind the rest of the Northeast as far as how much farmland is being kept as farmland versus like turned into other types of development. So I think like the pipeline is going more towards like farmland staying farmland and less towards like other types of land becoming farmland, although that definitely is a concern that people are thinking about.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Molly.
Yeah, hi, thanks everyone. I have a question. I think this is for Bethany, if you've been on the conservation subgroup, but I think you mentioned talking about promoting equitable access to conserved land. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more on what that conversation has been like in the group around how are you guys thinking about the different ways that access to land can be equitable or more equitable, or how that could be improved.
Sure. Yeah. So a couple things have been discussed. One of them has been geographic distribution related to equity. So right now, there's somewhere over, as far as getting to that 30% goal, we're somewhere in the 20% range. But a lot of that land is in far northern Maine in like really big tracts that are not super accessible to people. So one of the recommendations and metrics that the group is working on is trying to figure out prioritizing conserving land near population centers, right? So near places like Portland and Lewiston, Auburn, but also looking at how that's distributed across every county. So that's one way. Another way has been talking specifically about ADA accessibility. So as new land conservation projects happen, can we prioritize making those ADA accessible? And then there's also been a lot of conversation about like tribal sovereignty and like the Wabanaki relationship to land conservation. And that's been a much more difficult and complicated conversation, but that's also been a piece of what the group has been discussing.
Great. Thanks, Bethany. Floor is open for other questions or comments. Yeah. Steve would like to know if there's ways that the group is working to build greater awareness of climate change issues among young adults in Maine and help them find links and roles to respond meaningfully. Anyone in particular want to take that question? I think you're all really great to answer that since you're all very knowledgeable about our youth climate work, but anyone? Kate, you have a lot of great experience working in youth-led groups. Do you want to consider answering that question?
Yeah, sure. I think us all kind of being here is kind of an example of like what the Climate Council is doing. We're trying to hear other voices and hear other young people's voices. And I think this call is like a super great opportunity for us to hear from other young people. But yeah, I think it's just kind of like creating that network and connecting different representatives from different youth groups. And yeah, outreach is like a really challenging thing, but like we're privileged to live in like such a small state where, well, not such a small state, but like a state where there are a lot of people easily accessible. So yeah, I think that's another area that could be really interesting to hear people's thoughts on, is like what else could we be doing to engage more youth voices in addition to just like the youth reps and kind of like this kind of outreach.
Yeah, anyone else want to add to that? Mo yeah, I see a couple hands going up. Edge and then Bethany and Mo.
Sure. I just wanted to mention that I think a lot of the ways that young adults in Maine have like connected regarding climate issues is through each other. And I think a lot of the times when it's been a young person like taking action, they've kind of done it on their own and they've gone out and found the resources or the groups on their own because they're interested in it and they've encouraged other young people in their communities, like their friends or students at school, to get involved as well. And there has been like a lot of great orgs that have like kind of welcomed youth, and but I think definitely there's always more space between like older generations or more organized like scientific groups kind of like this to kind of welcome youth in. So I feel like that's why we're all here, because all the youth reps like wanted to be part of this, like and I feel like a lot of us were already doing work outside of this group before, like on top of our other things that we have to deal with, like school and whatever else. So yeah, I feel like in Maine, it's just the young people really take initiative. That's what.
Thanks, Edge. Bethany, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I feel like, at least in my own personal experience and like seeing a lot of the organizations that a lot of the reps on this call like represent that are youth-led organizations, like there is a lot of interest and energy and engagement from young people already. And I think some of the challenge comes from actually giving people somewhere to put that energy and like something to do. And I think like this group is like, or like being involved with the Climate Council and Maine Won't Wait has been one of those ways. And on a totally different note, the other thing I was thinking to say is like something I've been advocating a lot for in my working group has been around workforce development and like awareness for young people about careers that are related to, like in my case, it's the land conservation group and things like that. Like a huge concern that keeps coming up in this group is like staffing. Like we don't have capacity, we don't have people to do these projects. And I've been really advocating for saying like, are people even aware that these careers exist? And then second of all, are those careers, entry level? Are there entry level positions? Are they paid fairly? Things like that. But I think like there's also a really interesting opportunity here for the Climate Council and Maine Won't Wait to be thinking about like workforce development. And a lot of young people are interested in green careers in addition to like climate action and advocacy in their personal life.
That's great, Bethany. Thanks. Mo, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, totally. So just like kind of like adding on to what Edge and Bethany were saying, I think that like a big part of the equation is that like trying to like give outreach to people in this demographic, because a lot of them do want to actually get involved. They just aren't aware that these opportunities exist. So a lot of the problem is just trying to make people aware that this is something they can actually get involved in, and it's something they can uh, have a more personal role in, because there's a lot of energy behind that, especially now. So yeah.
Yeah, that was great, Mo. Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm hearing is like directing energy in the right places, and there could be amazing opportunities everywhere, but it's a matter of really like connecting young people to those opportunities, making sure they have the resources, the support, funding, etc. Yeah. See another question in the chat. From your experience in the Climate Council, what makes you most hopeful about current or future climate action in Maine? Anyone want to answer that question first?
I can start. Yeah, I've seen just a lot of energy and momentum across generations in the Climate Council. People really care deeply in Maine about helping to address climate change and doing so equitably, thinking about who's impacted and how they're impacted and what really matters to Maine's people. I mean, the meetings that we have can be 4 hours long and very intense, but the whole time people are really thinking about, well, who is this impacting and how can we help? So that's been a really hopeful thing, is just the fact that there are a large group of people that really do care. I don't know if anyone, I'm sure people want to add onto that as well.
Yeah, I can add on to that. Sort of in the same vein, sort of like is witnessing how like organized everything is a pretty good like prospect, I feel, because you can really see that people are trying to come at this from every angle possible. Just like the combinations of all of these different subgroups, uh, looking at it through all different layers of environmental science, are just trying to get the most holistic view of the issue that they can. And I think that's a really, really good thing.
Yeah, I would add on, I think for me, it's been seeing how many different kinds of people are really engaged in the process. I think like my group includes everyone from the Sierra Club to people who represent like the biggest logging industries in the state, right? And so it has been really encouraging to see that it's a relatively depolarized conversation. Like people are coming from extremely different backgrounds and very different ideas about the priorities that they have, but everyone is there with a lot of energy and respect for each other and like this willingness to, as other folks said, like commit to a long meeting and really engage in the conversation. So it's actually been a little bit depolarizing for me, which has been really hopeful.
I'm hopeful about the commitments that the group has made to like representing both young people's voices, but also a wide variety of different identities. And like the work that the group is doing to like deepen that representation, even though like where we're at might not be like the end goal, or every voice might not currently be heard, like the effort that's being put into making that more inclusive, but also just like the progress that's been made so far, like as a as a program and as a climate action plan, like where we came from to what we've achieved so far. It's really very inspiring and it makes me very hopeful for the future.
Yeah, if I can just like quickly add on to that, another thing is definitely also like the inclusion of like a lot of ethical considerations, like making sure that we're keeping the sovereignty of Native peoples in mind. That's also something that was like really helpful. That I was like really happy to see as I started to like join the STS and like attend the meetings. So that's just another thing I was really happy about.
Yeah, super important to think about what keeps us going, right? This is really hard work. It's important, but it can be hard, and focusing on what gives us hope is really important. I think the STS, they'll be releasing their updates soon, and some of that is going to focus on the science of hope um, from our friends at the Island Institute are thinking a lot about that. Yeah, we need lots of hope right now. So really important in this work. Thanks everyone for sharing. Any other questions or thoughts? We have lots of time, so please feel free, or if it's even just something that you'd like to share that you've experienced recently. I know we've had a lot of flooding and a lot of damage from storms here in Maine recently, so I know that's kind of top of mind for a lot of us today over the past couple months. Yeah, Claire, go ahead.
Hey y'all, sorry for my weird backlighting here. It's just so nice out. I had to get outside. But yeah, thanks for just having this space for all of us. I think this is so helpful. I had something that's coming up for me. I guess it's more of a comment, and maybe like if you all want to riff on the theme, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts, and we've already been kind of talking about it. But this idea of like access, just keeps coming up in my own life, in my own work, and I hear it coming up here. I think especially like this idea of young people having this like energy and wanting to put that towards something. Like I think a lot about farming and access to land, who has access to land, like why do you have to own land to be able to like help regenerate it and feed your communities? And there's like a lot of frustration there for me personally, and I'm sure for a lot of other people. So that's coming up, but it's also like this access to like what we need to have a really sustainable, resilient, equitable future. Like, you know, frustrations around lack of public transportation, frustrations around like lack of clean and safe and you know, efficient housing, like all of these things that we like see that we need, but it's not here, and we don't necessarily like have the tools or the resources to just like pop it into existence on our own. And so that's just what's coming up for me in this conversation, and would love to hear your thoughts about any of those things.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claire. I think a lot of what you said resonated, at least with me, and I'm sure some of the other youth reps. Does anyone want to add to that or kind of keep going on just the many different tracks that climate change is kind of prompting us to think about how we live and how we create action and policy in our communities?
I'll riff in like one of the many directions that this could go, but I guess like I think a lot about like how to make change, and I've also, this is my first time around being involved with the climate council working groups and with this type of thing, and it's definitely a process of making change from within the system, right? And like the jury is out on what everyone's personal approach is, whether or not it's like working from outside the system and like creating a world that you want to see, or if it's like working from within. And in my experience, this particular process has been very much working from within. But I will say, like, it has been very rewarding to learn how does change happen incrementally. And there's also been a lot of value in having my voice and other young people's voices, because like, for example, like if something that like if we're here and I'm thinking of something like, wow, our world really, like I could imagine a future where we've like completely changed how we view this or how we access this, like I have felt like I can at least advocate for there to be a sentence in there or a writing or a piece of language that like calls for that. Like, for example, like thinking about the farmland piece, like we're drafting our recommendations right now. And like, because of advocacy of several people in my group, like there is a thing in there that specifically says like, consider non-traditional methods of like farmland acquisition, such as community land trusts and like farming access for people of color, right? Like, so those things actually like do get a chance to be written in there. And that can be really frustrating when you're like, I want to see it, like I want to have it happening, I want us to already be there. But it, at least for me, has been interesting to see what's the actual process of like advocating to get that named, because oftentimes like naming something means that at least it can't be forgotten. And in this case, like the climate plan, it's like in 4 years, they're going to have to hold it up again and be like, there's that sentence in there. Like, why didn't we do this? Or what, the next group will have to be like, we have to evaluate like whether or not we did that. So that's just like something that comes up for me, is like, it's a very different process, like working from within the system. And this feels like very deep into that at the same time, but it also, I have felt like I have some agency.
Thanks, Bethany. That's super insightful. It's always great to hear your perspectives. Yeah, about naming things. Yeah, totally. Thanks, Claire. It's always nice to just like share, like what kind of feelings come up, what kind of thoughts. Like we're all thinking about climate change a lot. So it's nice to just like see what is in action and what state is doing, what communities are doing, and yeah, trying to connect like youth energy to that work is a challenge, and it's so important. That's why we're here today. There's a couple questions in the chat I wanted to get to, but we can definitely pick up that conversation later on. Abby's wondering, are youth reps on this call planning to continue climate work after the Maine Climate Council's climate action plan is due in December? And if so, do they have recommendations as to how young people can get involved after the Maine Climate Council finishes this round of work? That's a great question. Anyone feel like they want to take a stab at that?
I can. I guess for me personally, the answer is yes, of course. Like I definitely will continue some of the work that I'm doing outside of the Climate Council. But I'm also like in high school still, so that's a bit easier. I still have like college and things to look forward to, and still some kind of like cushion of like groups to be involved with. But I think that I'm really looking forward to like kind of the connections that the work with the Climate Council will allow me to make, and I'm excited to see what will come out of that. But yeah, definitely I will continue doing similar work in the state of Maine.
Thanks, Kate. I can add a little bit of perspective on that of just kind of the timeline of the Climate Council and the working groups. When the climate action plan is delivered, that doesn't end the work of the council and the working groups. Like this process is ongoing. It's just the pacing and the timing of meetings changes depending on where we're at in the planning process. Right now, for example, it's a little more intense, I guess, because the working groups are meeting very regularly to discuss what they want to recommend to go into the next climate action plan in December. But the working groups continue to meet after the fact. They just won't meet as often, but we have a whole plan to then implement, right? Like right now, we are implementing Maine Won't Wait, and we are currently planning for Maine Won't Wait 2.0 is what we're calling it, the next climate action plan. So there's definitely still a lot of work that the youth reps will do as a part of their working groups, right? Like spreading awareness, seeing how these actions are being implemented in communities. And then to speak a little bit about how young people can get involved after the Climate Council finishes this round of work. Does anyone, we can think about the Climate Council or beyond, unless Abby, if you were really curious to hear about any particular thing. Does anyone have any suggestions of like how young people can get involved in the process? Or yeah, Edge, go ahead.
Maine Youth for Climate Justice, which is one of the orgs that I'm a part of, they're really good at kind of engaging with people who are looking to get involved and maybe haven't had any experience before. They have monthly statewide calls where they host a topic of some sort and kind of have a discussion like this. And honestly, if you reach out to them or any other, or like Sierra Club, Just Me for Just Us, which focuses on rural youth organizing, they're all very like open and welcome. And if they themselves can't give you a specific thing, they'll definitely point you in the right direction. Yeah, and we can probably make a list of these orgs to send them out. And if you probably wanted to talk to any of the youth reps after this call to talk about what we do like outside of the Climate Council, I'm sure anyone would be willing to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Edge. Oh, Kate, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, just echoing Edge, like going back to that network, where any of the organizations that any of us are involved in will be a great place to start. It just takes like finding that one community, and then you're like, you've unlocked a connection of hundreds of people who are all really super cool and really excited and involved. So yeah.
Abigail, can I turn the question back on you? Like, so if someone's here and they're listening and they're like, wow, that like one committee, I like feel like I would love to be involved with that next time around. Like, how would someone actually be sitting in the seat that we're sitting in?
Yeah, email me is a great place to start. Yeah, just get a hold, like you can get a hold of me, you can get a hold of the other youth reps. I'm gonna send a follow-up email to all of the folks on this call tomorrow morning with the resources that we're talking about, instead of me just like dropping a million links in the chat. I'll just send a more concise email. So yeah, to be a youth rep, there is no formal process, but we're always looking for young people to get involved in the process. I will say working group meetings are open to anyone. They're on Zoom most of the time, or they're hybrid in person, but there's almost like they're all public. So I'll send a link tomorrow morning with some resources, or just a link to our Maine Climate Council meeting calendar, where we put all of those meetings on one calendar, so you can look and sign up on Zoom and listen in. And in every one of those meetings, there's always an opportunity to have public comment. So that space is held for folks who are just listening in to share their feedback, or you can just listen and hear like what it's like to be a fly on the wall and listen to those conversations. All of this is meant to be participatory and really open for public listening and participation. So that is always an option, and like now is a great time to be listening to those conversations, because the working groups are really getting into the meat of what strategies they want to recommend to the Climate Council in June. So that is a great thing to do like right now if you're curious. And if you want to take it a next step further and think about being a youth rep, please let me know. You can get a hold of any one of these youth reps as well. I'm happy to relay their contact information if you want to hear about what it's really like on the day-to-day or week-to-week basis, how much of a time commitment it is. But it's so important that we have youth participation in this process. And so youth reps are one channel of doing that. My job exists to engage young people in this process through other mechanisms. I love working and supporting with the youth reps, but this is one example. This discussion session is one example of how we engage young people. I'm happy to come speak to your school or your workplace about what we do and more specific actions young people can take that can kind of help us implement our climate action plan and also make a positive impact on your life. And we're hosting future discussion sessions, both in person and online, is the plan to really keep continuing this space for young people to share their thoughts and their feedback. And I would also add on to the community aspect. I think one of the most important pieces you can do as a young person is find like-minded people. And I think we're so lucky in Maine that there are a lot of wonderful community-based organizations who are in this work and in it deep, and they would welcome your participation. The groups that Edge was mentioning are fantastic. And there's so many more. So just finding your people, and it's important to have that community when you're doing this work. And that would just be, I guess, like a recommendation of mine, and something that we can continue to create with our youth reps here, and also just through the organizations that are doing this fantastic work. Claire, I know you work with CB, and I want to give a shout out to CB, Center for Ecology-Based Economy. They are an example of like creating a really strong community in Eastern Maine and doing really fantastic climate work. So it's just one example of many. I could keep going, but I'll stop there. Gonna look back at the chat. We're starting to get close to time here, but definitely still have time for a couple more questions. Lars was driving home from a ski trip with his fiance last weekend, and they had to turn around 3 times due to flooded roads and blown out culverts. Are there any examples of how this group is working to prioritize resilience of Maine's infrastructure? Anyone feel like they can take a stab at that question about infrastructure resilience and blown out culverts?
Isn't there like a whole other group doing that?
There is, yes. There is a buildings, infrastructure, and housing working group that is focusing on that. I also think the transportation working group is thinking a lot about road safety and sort of like that overlap between infrastructure and transportation. Molly, I might, if you feel comfortable answering that question, do you want to provide a little bit of insight?
Yes, well, actually, yeah, I will say that I think this issue is being addressed in a kind of overlap between the transportation and community resilience working groups. I'm on the buildings working group. We don't talk about infrastructure, even though it's in the title, so that's a little bit weird. But yeah, it's at least been discussed in transportation and community resilience. We talked about this in January at our special Maine Climate Council meeting, which was held to focus specifically on resilience in the face of extreme weather events like the storms that happened in December and January. And there was kind of a sort of a reorienting where it felt like the council and a lot of the people there really wanted to see resilience addressed in all of the working groups, whereas I think from what I've heard the last time around for the previous climate action plan, it was kind of like some of the working groups were more focused on reducing emissions and carbon sequestration, and then the community resilience and coastal and marine and maybe natural and working lands were focused on resilience. And this time around after January, there was kind of a call for all of the working groups to address resilience in some way. So I know that in buildings, we've been talking about how to make, are there policy strategies that can enhance the resilience of Maine's buildings in addition to like reducing fossil fuel emissions from buildings, which is what we really focused on last time. So I think, I'm not sure if the youth reps would agree with this. It seems like there will be some stronger recommendations on resilience of not just infrastructure, but also buildings and, particularly like working waterfront infrastructure that might come out of this climate action plan as opposed to last time.
Thanks, Molly. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I just wanted to make it explicit, right? Like you're thinking of doing other conversations like this, but with folks who are from potentially those groups. Is that correct? So someone who's really curious about this could come to another one.
Yes, that is the plan. Thanks, Bethany. Yep. And that's something I'd love to get folks' feedback on, is if there is interest in particular topics that you'd like to hear from other youth reps about, but that is the plan to host other conversations. This one is about the environment and climate, but also thinking about transportation, energy, other areas that the youth reps are in. This is just a small group of the whole cohort of youth reps. So there's lots to discuss, but yeah, culverts and infrastructure and road flooding, it's like everywhere we turn right now, and it's definitely something we are having to deal with more and more. So thanks, Molly, for adding that perspective. We have about a couple minutes left here. Anything else folks want to add, contribute to the conversation? Did the youth reps have any final little bits of info or knowledge, any big takeaways from their work so far, like anything else? If you were to share one thing, you can feel free to say something if you'd like.
I guess I just have a question to pose if we have time for that. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, of the bits that you've heard from all of us tonight, like, what are some areas that we might have not touched on, or like, what are some really important things that haven't been voiced that you think that the Climate Council as a whole should know about, if there are any?
Thanks, Kate. I think we'll give folks a little bit to think about that, but it's a fantastic question and something we absolutely want people to be thinking about is what are we missing? What can we always like add more to the conversation about? Thanks, Steve. Steve would like to hear more about the role of our Indigenous people in the council. That's a great comment. A little out of the scope of today's call with youth, climate, and the environment, but thank you so much for flagging that, and something that we can definitely bring back to the conversation. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear if the Climate Council is doing any work focused particularly on climate education in Maine schools. That's something that I'm particularly passionate about and seems relevant with youth.
Definitely. Yep. Any youth rep want to quickly answer that question? We've been discussing it a little bit, but anyone feel comfortable answering that? I'm happy to provide a little bit of information from my side in the governor's office. Laura, that's a great question and something that the Department of Education has been working on. They hired a climate education specialist last summer. His name's Teddy Lyman, and he's been working on creating opportunities for educators to receive funding opportunities to strengthen their climate education and curriculum development. They're actually forming a climate education stakeholder group right now. If that's something you'd be interested in joining, I can absolutely send you the link. I can drop it in the chat before we end the call. That's an opportunity for educators and young people and all sorts of folks to kind of join in the conversation and think about like what curriculum development could look like for educators in Maine and how it can be implemented through schools. But it's not something that we focus on too much here with the youth reps. And it is definitely something that is mentioned in Maine Won't Wait and something we discuss in the Climate Council. And we try and like have the right amount of overlap with our friends at the Department of Education, as well as the fantastic community-based organizations, Maine Environmental Education Association, Nature-Based Education Consortium, are some of the leaders in the climate education work, as you might know. So it's definitely like a statewide effort, and happy to connect more with you about that if you would like any more information, but I'll get you the link for that stakeholder group application. So one question, Abby is wondering, I know this comes up at Maine Climate Council meetings, but I think climate fatigue, climate anxiety, pessimism is such an issue among younger people. Would love to see more focus on that, and Claire agrees. So helpful to hear that. Thank you both. Yep, it is. I think, you know, folks, especially who are entrenched in this work, understand that the climate anxiety and fatigue is real. It's something that exists, and really great to hear that that is something you'd like to see more focus on. And Abby, I'm curious, do you have like, what might you want to see? If that's something you feel comfortable answering in the chat, what like, are you maybe looking for more spaces to just kind of like share those feelings, or maybe some like support from organizations and state agencies on like how we can better help our communities with climate anxiety and fatigue, like, or just more focus in general? But you can
I
feel
don't
free.
think there's time to type that in the chat, so maybe I'll just quickly
Sure.
quickly say it. I just think for a lot of younger people, like myself included, pessimism and fatigue is such a big barrier to getting involved in all of this climate work. So yeah, just focusing on ways to substantially address that amongst younger people, I think is a really good pathway to actually get more youth involved in these governmental conversations about how to, you know, plot out a better life for those of us who are going to be, you know, experiencing the real brunt of climate change in the not too distant but not too near future.
Yeah, super helpful to hear that that is a barrier. I mean, yeah, it totally makes sense, right? It is a barrier to getting more engagement, more interaction from young people with climate change and climate action. So thank you so much for bringing that up, and definitely something we want to keep thinking about and considering with the Climate Council and youth reps. And Molly added to the chat, the Community Resilience Working Group is looking at psychological resilience and the mental health impacts of climate change. So thanks, Molly, that's an excellent point. Yeah, okay, that's, I like ending on that. Yeah, and Alyssa also mentioned it's been a priority with the STS Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. And yes, NYCJ hosts. Yeah, okay, you guys can read the chat. I'll just start to wrap up the call. But I think that's a great way to end the call because it's definitely top of mind for a lot of us and thinking about maybe future opportunities to provide more support and start to remove that barrier. And it's a balance of like, I mean, ideally it's less fatigue and more energy and activation, right? So really great to flag that. We just have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to make sure that we kind of wrap things up, and I let you guys know about some ways to keep in the conversation and staying involved. I have some QR codes on the screen for the Climate Council newsletter. It's a great way to stay informed and to kind of keep up with all of the meetings that we have. We have a link tree that you can find a whole bunch of resources on. There's stories, there's resources for communities, links to our climate action plan, all sorts of things. So definitely check that out. You can follow us on Instagram at Maine Climate Council to keep up as well. I also wanted to put in a plug that that's supposed to say GOPIF, not GOPF. Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future is currently hiring 3 summer interns. So if you know anyone that might want to apply for those, I will send a link out in my follow-up email tomorrow morning. And then I have my email address there. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here to support young people in this work. So if there's anything you would like to chat to me about one-on-one, I am here for you and happy to point you in the right direction for other resources you might be interested in. Thank you all so much for being here. This was really wonderful. Thank you to the youth reps for taking the time to chat. It's always great to hear your perspectives. We're looking forward to having more of these conversations. So if there's anything you would like to specifically learn about, please share that feedback with me. With that, I think we're gonna go ahead and call it a night. So thank you all again. Hope to see you in the future and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thanks all.